Chris Nichols, a beloved Canadian camera reviewer, had just traveled to Barcelona, Spain at the request of Panasonic to be there for their new S-Series camera unveiling. There was a short period of time before that, however, where he was able to go out with his friend Dan Bercalia, explore the sights, the beautiful parks, and take in some of the smaller pleasures that Barcelona had to offer. However, his revelry was cut short as it was time for him to take a look at the new Panasonic S-Series cameras.
Welcome back, DPReview TV viewers. Chris Nichols here from DPReview TV, and today, as you can see, we are coming to you from a beautiful country. We're in Spain. Panasonic has brought us out here. They put us up, they've flown us out. It's been great. We're in the lovely city of Barcelona. And what we're going to do today is play with the brand new S1 and S1R cameras. Now, I should mention that these are still pre-production, so this is not a full review, but it's just too good an opportunity to play with these cameras and get an early look. So now that I've been playing with the camera for a while, I have to say actually one of the things I really enjoy is very much the SLR-like interface. All the buttons are in very good positions. I like the tactile response on this camera. Knobs are large. We've got locking knobs everywhere. I mean, really, it's been designed in an excellent way. Nice customizability here, and again, the only complaints, if I have to really nitpick on stuff, I do find that some of the levers and knobs are a little bit easier to click than I'd like. So I do find sometimes, oh, I'm in manual focus, I didn't mean to be, or I accidentally put myself into silent shutter, I didn't mean to be, but you know, those are minor things. And the grip otherwise is the only other thing. When holding the camera upright and shooting, it's very comfortable. I get a really nice purchase on the camera. But when walking around with it, I do find that my fingers are pressing in against the body. They're getting a little bit sore. A little uncomfortable to carry when you're walking around, but very comfortable to actually shoot when it's up to your eye. So one thing you'll notice on the S1 and S1R is we don't have a fully articulating screen going out to the side, much like you'd have on a GH5. And that's too bad because I really like that setup. I know that we might have to push these inputs back, but this is a large camera. I feel like we have the real estate to do it. But in this particular case, although the screen is very, very nice to look at, I can articulate it only upwards or downwards, and then with the very Fuji-S system, pop it out to the side in one direction. It's better than nothing. It does let me get this shot, but I do wish that I had a fully articulating screen. Now, keeping in mind that this camera is still pre-production, I do want to mention one thing here. I'm still seeing the Panasonic continuous autofocusing jitters. So when the camera's continuous autofocusing, you're going to get that nervousness. It just looks like it's focusing in and out really quickly. Is this going to get rectified with firmware? My feeling is no. I think this is just the way Panasonics like to shoot. And that's because, again, there's no phase detector array, so something you'll still have to deal with.
After taking a short while to familiarize himself with the S1R, Chris met up with his good friend Gordon Lang of Camera Labs. Gordon had been to the city of Barcelona many times, and once considered moving there, he took Chris to some of his favorite haunts in town. They drank delicious coffee and visited some of the spectacular cathedrals. Though the time was delightful, Chris had to get back to the review at hand.
So one thing you're going to notice here is a brand new battery system. Very large, very reminiscent of what you might find in like a Leica SL. It's over 3,000 milliamp hours, and yet the camera must have a heavy power usage. Again, this is pre-production, but what I'm finding, I've been out for a couple hours now, I've taken 200 images, and I'm about halfway through my battery. So it's not bad, but it's not great. And what I'm actually doing is making sure to keep the camera off, turn it on when I want to get shots. Now, to the camera's credit, the on-off switch is easy to access, and its startup time is almost instantaneous, so I don't feel like I'm missing shots. But I would like to just be able to leave it on, walk around, and take shots, and now I'm feeling like I have to be mindful of my battery life a little bit. Now, by far, one of my favorite features on these cameras now is the new EVF. We're talking about 5.7 million dots, the highest resolution that I've used personally in a camera, and it's beautiful. And on top of that, it does have 120 frame per second refresh rate, so it just gives you that nice smoothness, especially when you're trying to track moving subjects. Now, I am using 120 frames per second today. That might be why I was having some issues with battery life. I'm still seeing the drain happen, and that will take a toll. So why I'm using the S1R today, it has a new 47.3 megapixel sensor, very high resolution, obviously competitive with the best full frame cameras that are out there on the market right now. However, it also does have their pixel shift technology now transferred into this camera, largely quadrupling the resolution. It's 187 megapixels, and that is a huge amount. So I've locked off the camera, as you can see here on a ledge. I'm not just balancing on here. I've got my little tripod set up, shooting f8. I've got good detail over here, and you know, from what we can tell without being able to really analyze it, it does have a noticeable resolution bump. Now, tripod is going to be a necessity for this system. It's not going to work, for example, like Olympus's system where you can use the stabilizer, composite a whole bunch of images and get that handheld capability, but it does still take 8 frames and it does do a good job. Keep in mind that the S1 also has the same technology, effectively quadrupling its 24 megapixel resolution. And for a lot of people, I think that's going to be a more usable file at a much lower price point. Still, regardless, you get a camera that has good versatility when you need resolution to punch well above its weight. So, of course, you've all heard that a lot of the full frame mirrorless cameras on the market are single slot only. Well, we do have dual card slots here. So SD card slot, UHS 2, and we also have an XQD port. Now, I'm a big fan of the XQD card. I think it's very rugged, it's very reliable, but most importantly, it has a very fast transfer rate. So when shooting on these cameras, when it comes to the buffer, the S1R can shoot 40 RAWs in a row before it has to slow down, and the S1 can shoot 90 RAWs in a row. If you go to JPEG, you only get a marginal increase. The S1R can shoot 50 JPEGs before it has to slow down, but the S1 can basically shoot an infinite amount. Their term is 999. I don't see that ever happening. Well, Dan's back there shooting my good side. I don't even want to know what they're saying about me. I want to talk about the S1 and the S1R's frames per second burst rate. So it's actually a very respectable 6 frames per second with continuous autofocus, and it'll push to 9 frames per second if you go into single autofocus, if you don't need it to track continuously. On top of that, you do have 4K and 6K photo modes, which you know that I love. So this is very respectable because it puts it just slightly faster than the Nikon and Canon versions of their mirrorless full frames. The Sonys are still going to have a little bit of a faster frames per second capability, but it is a good first outing for Panasonic's first mirrorless full frame. Okay, so the shooting experience is over, which means that Panasonic is going to steal Jordan's S1 back from him out of his warm, living hands. But that's okay, he's going back to the GH5, and I still have an S1R sample I'm going to hold on to. We're going to go do some night shooting. So now that I've been carrying this camera around for a couple days, I have to say it is a heavy camera. I know we've already talked about that. It started to actually cramp my fingers a little bit on the grip here. But one benefit when I'm shooting low light situations like this heavy camera gives me a solid platform. I'm able to handhold at fairly slow shutter speeds. At 100 millimeters, I'm getting down to about 1/6 of a second is probably the best I can do. That's not bad. That's pretty comparable to the other full frame mirrorless cameras on the market. So, that's kind of an okay light show, but check this out. On the S1 series, I can hit this button and illuminate that, hey? Pretty nice? Yeah, not really, I know. It's not really that impressive. It's basically the bare minimum, but I do like that it lights up. It's got the top LCD. I know a lot of you guys are going to dig that. And I can light up my playback, my quick menu buttons, but I would have liked to see more controls lit up. Things like white balance, ISO controls, maybe even like my card door so that I can find that latch in the dark easily. So for astrophotography, bare minimum.
Chris regretfully left Barcelona early the following morning, but vowed to return again as soon as it was possible. Upon returning home to Calgary, Canada, he found himself in the midst of a terrible cold snap. However, the business of finishing the review was not yet done, and he would have to soldier on.
So why didn't we finish our little look at the Panasonic S1, S1R in Barcelona? Well, we needed more time to just look at files and try to get our impressions as best as possible. But all we can really leave you guys with is impressions because, as you know, this is still pre-production firmware. So what are some of these things that we're looking forward to when it comes to image quality? Well, the S1 has a very similar sensor to what we've seen on the market. I think it's going to be very comparable, which is to say quite good. But the S1R has a unique sensor that we haven't really seen before, so we want to test that quite heavily when we do get final firmware. The closest camera I could compare it to would probably be the Nikon Z7 because they have a similar resolution. But the Panasonic is a 100 ISO bottom. The Nikon Z7 can go 64 ISO, so that's intriguing. Is the Nikon going to give us better, dynamic range? At the same time, the Nikon has that phase detector array built into the sensor, which causes some banding, limits how far you can push those shadows, whereas the Panasonic isn't going to have that issue. So autofocus is going to be the category that leaves us with the most questions because really firmware is going to play such a big part apart and how well that performs. But I do love that Panasonic's focusing on their autofocus systems with animals and people. I mean, this is what we're looking for. I like how it's transitioning between eye to face to body quite seamlessly. Hopefully that'll be refined a little bit better. I like that we have the option to turn on or turn off the animal focus. And the only real issue I have is I wish that when the camera does lose its tracking of a subject based on its deep learning, that it would go to something other than just wide continuous autofocus area. I want to be able to set it to go to tracking or something like that, much like the Sony does. So hopefully that'll improve. So here's my final thoughts. I think that the S1R really puts itself into a niche with that high resolution, but I think the S1 is actually to be the more exciting camera. It's more affordable, it's got better video capabilities, it'll be more competitive against competition, and you can still do an almost 100 megapixel file with the pixel shift if you need to. Also, the glass, it's expensive, and the cameras are fairly expensive. Are Canon users going to find this a good home with adapters for their lenses? That's also going to be an interesting question. The only other thing I want to mention, we haven't really talked about video, and that's because, again, pre-production, and it looks like a lot of interesting updates are going to come out with firmware, so we really want to wait to see if that comes true before we fully review it. Well, I hope you guys found that early look helpful and useful. Don't forget, go to Instagram, Twitter, and our YouTube channel. Please subscribe, comment below, let us know what you think about this new camera as it comes out. But I'm excited to see how it's going to do. It has a lot of promise. I hope it can deliver.
At the end of his brief but turbulent time with the Panasonic S-series bodies, Chris was sure of only two things. One, that the key to properly understanding who this camera was for and what it could accomplish would only be realized once he had access to the final firmware. But two, that after testing endless models from many brands, he was no closer to finding that perfect full-frame mirrorless camera that truly completed him as a photographer.